All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Voxology podcast. If you don't tune in to the YouTube channel, and I don't blame you. I mean, I only mention it because Tim texted me and said we're almost at 1,500 subscribers. So I didn't realize my mom could subscribe that many times. So thank you, Mom. Amazing. But we always have creative names on, at least I do. Tim Stafford is always Tim Stafford. But yeah, and that's fair. But today, I've entered into the chat as Rizlord. And for those of you who are of a certain age, that sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. Like when I read the sentence, Lizzie Dunn rizzes up baby Gronk, which was a real sentence in my timeline. I and all the other middle-aged people went, well, I understand, well, I don't even understand the individual words, but evidently Riz is short for charisma.
Oh,
and
I didn't know that.
Yep. And Riz, well, I mean,
Gronk was the only word I knew that you said.
Well, baby, I understand baby.
I guess so.
Yeah, evidently Lizzie, is that her name? Dunn?
I don't know who that is.
Is a gymnast but a social media person or something. Anyway, and baby Gronk is like this 10-year-old football player or something.
Oh, it's not Gronk?
No.
Oh,
no.
See, I'm way out.
But I'm not even, I mean, I was trying to get my kids to explain this, but Riz is where I want to focus.
Charisma.
Because charisma. So
always say that like that was like Pauly Shore just came out of the back of my subconscious.
That was amazing.
Wheeze the juice. Charisma.
Yeah. So Riz.
Yeah.
So a Riz Lord is a Lord of Riz.
Obviously.
And which means you have lots of charisma.
Well, you are a Riz Lord, so.
Well, I think the definition is more specific, so as to exclude people like me, because I think there's a certain attractiveness sort of implied as well, sort of like like charisma, but also like an attractiveness. So if you have Riz, like people are attracted to you, and so I'm the Riz Lord of my own house.
There you go.
So yeah,
there's a lot of charisma in your house, though.
Oh Lord, you know what? That's true. I can't even say that. Yeah, I would say Seth Erie is probably the Riz Lord in our house.
He's got a lot of Riz.
He's got a lot of Riz. Anyway, that took us to places I didn't realize. I just wanted to comment on the screen name being used in YouTube. I also want to comment. I mean, first of all, Tim, how was your week? Tim and I talk regularly, so it's not like once a week I go, "Hey, how was your week?" Usually, Tim and I, we don't want to just engage in mindless banter for the first few moments. Although that's kind of the only banter we offer. But Tim has been saying, "Listen, we need to be more intentional."
Yeah, we do.
With that Riz spot, the opening Riz, the pod Riz. Kind of a pod Rizener. I don't know.
He is risen.
Oh, wow.
Okay, too far.
So anyway, how was your week?
It was busy. It's still working on the bathroom. Still learning. Everything's gutted and the tub's in, but today I have to put in the floors and the walls so I can tile tomorrow.
Yes. Tim, and I don't know if this is betraying a confidence, has an explosive case of IBS. And
I've just been holding it for 2 weeks.
Yeah, and had to redo his entire bathroom. And so we're okay. If Tim's a little uptight, that's what's going on.
That's right.
So how many bathrooms do you have in your house?
Well, we have an apartment that we built downstairs that we rent out. That has a bathroom in it.
Okay.
And then we have one bathroom for us.
Okay.
So the tenant
which is the bathroom?
She's gone right now, so we're using her space. So I have to get this finished before she comes back.
The tenant.
Yeah.
As we say.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Very exciting.
And you are instead of the Riz Lord, you are the landlord.
That's correct.
Is what we say. What a horrible name. So Tim has been busy on the opposite of Riz. Well, I don't know. For some people, like remodeling a bathroom by yourself, there's Riz there, I would imagine.
Yeah, there's like some,
Mechanical
prying a
Riz.
3-inch concrete slab off of the sinks. Like,
Yeah.
there's things like that were a little bit much, where I really had to use my Riz language.
At that point, I just use a sledgehammer.
I did, but I didn't want to break. I did that to snap the concrete, but then I'd use one of those big pry bars to get it off, and then carry it out to the truck. And it's just this huge slab of concrete and tile.
Yeah.
Very heavy.
Yeah.
This is why you pay
sure
people
people-
like $50,000 to do this.
Seriously. And I'm sure people would be really interested to hear more about this.
I think they would too. Maybe I'll do a tutorial
yeah.
video. Hey guys.
Hey, guys. Oh, speaking of Riz. All right, so my daughter Hannah and my son's, I was going to say daughter-in-law, girlfriend, Katie, they are preparing today they're making an appearance on the YouTube, but they are, look at,
Oh, yeah.
this is going to be on YouTube. Look at my little title there.
Rizlord?
Yeah.
That's so funny.
What you mean to say is that's so
that's
true.
Amazing. That's so true.
Yes.
Accurate.
So, Hannah, thoughts? These ladies are preparing to go to Bonnaroo. And so, what did you guys buy today? What supplies did you buy for Bonnaroo today? What are some Bonnaroo
First of all,
supplies?
we bought necessities.
Hannah, why are you staring at yourself?
Because I can't believe people are seeing this right now.
Well, they're not seeing it right now, but they'll see it
In a few days.
in a few days.
Portable
Yes.
charger.
Oh,
Oh,
smart.
smart.
Portable charger. Smart.
Do you
Absolutely.
really want to see? Do you want to see the top I'm wearing?
Well, I don't know. This is YouTube, and
And then I got
Yeah, well, you get canceled.
okay, I will not get canceled. I am a white man.
It's actually so. It's true. It's actually so cute.
All right, let me see your cute top. Again, if you're only listening to the podcast, you're missing the cute top right now. So we're
Bonnaroo
trying to drive
fashion
YouTube
show.
traffic.
Trying to make it so small.
Okay, hold on a second. That doesn't seem.
No, so just wait.
Hold on.
Doesn't seem much like it.
Yeah, is top the word you want to use for that?
It's a bathing
Or-
suit.
It's a napkin.
It's actually
Okay.
it was in the bathing suit section.
Oh, okay.
And I have my
Well,
little sweater to put over it.
oh, yep.
But see, it's more than a normal bikini. It has this whole little bottom layer.
That's right.
Okay.
So if anything, it's a very modest bikini.
Okay. All right. That's excellent. Tim and I are both going, well,
See, look, it's like a little top.
Well-
you could.
okay, this is going on YouTube, my sweet girl. So,
That's
yeah.
rich.
I regret.
Tim, this is your future.
Nope.
Mazzy. Yep, they grow up, and they go to Bonnaroo. So great top, B.
Different people.
Yes. Oh my Lord. Okay, they're leaving. Hallelujah. Tell Seth to come down because they got us so many views. So this is what happens in our house. There's just massive amounts of chaos and tomfoolery.
Tomfoolery. That dated you. Rizlord.
Yep. That's right. We do. Oh, here he comes. Oh, put a shirt on, boy. Yeah, don't. All right, I'm sorry. If you're just tuning into the podcast and you're like in your car right now, I'm sorry. It's just a cheap attempt to drive YouTube traffic. But besides all the talk of charisma and Rizlord, Seth wanted to model the Voxology hat today. So, hey guys, we are recording.
We've had
So we
quite a
don't-
few requests for those hats.
We have, and I thought, yeah. I mean, we're open to merch for a good reason. We don't want to, we have a community that supports this, so we don't need to sell merch to pay bills or. Oh, there he is. Okay, there he is. Seth, there, put the hat
now we have
on.
The whole crew.
And Big Nate. Yep, Big Nate. Everyone here. Seth, come on. Oh, there it is. There he is. Oh, that hat's looking fresh, dude. All right.
Nate's here.
Yeah, Nate's here as well. Yeah, Nate, notice my screen name. Why are you laughing? It's not stupid. Where do you think you got it, bro? Where do you? All right, Seth.
Yes.
You want to say hi to everybody?
Hey, but I got Voxology hat.
Yes,
Hey,
you do have a Voxology hat. Are you? Does the hat make you more handsome or less handsome?
And what's this?
More handsome for sure. Now, Seth, tell us about your summer so far.
My summer is been great.
It's been great. Nice. Okay, you want to tell us anything else about your summer?
Summer with the swimming.
Yeah, we went swimming yesterday before a big storm came through, huh?
Yep, it's a big peak. It wet me.
Yeah, well, there was thunder and lightning right
Yeah.
over us. Oh, it was amazing, huh? Yeah. Anything else?
What about
Nate.
Naping home?
Yeah.
Nate's home.
Oh, that's right. Nate's home.
Nate's
I
here.
forgot about
Come on,
that.
Nate.
Yeah.
Come on, Nate.
So Big Nate's home. Rockin'. Are you going to wear the Pink Floyd shirt to Bonnaroo today?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay. We don't think so.
I don't know. It's a black shirt. I don't want to be
You
like.
should go get a bikini top too.
Yeah, you should. Hey, Hannah maybe has an extra bikini top. You could throw down.
Throw that on.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so yes, and Seth, man, you look so great. All right, so I think we probably lost most of our audience.
Oh yeah.
At this point,
No.
but we have two things.
What are you talking about? All the audience is here now.
We have two things.
It's on my live.
It is Daddy Mike Live. Exactly right. Oh,
Oh, Nate!
yeah. Nate put the Voxology hat on. Good Lord.
Seth is
All
pure
right.
hype.
Hey, I
Man.
want to just.
Oh, he is a hype man. You don't even understand.
I want to announce my commitment
Yeah.
to
To Voxology podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. We're moving on. Love you guys.
Let's hit the beat song.
We'll hit the theme songs, all the theme songs. Oh my word. All right. Dang, bro. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about all of that. But
Nothing you can say.
no, but it was, if you think you had a bad week, imagine being a female in the Southern Baptist Convention. So this week,
That's quite a segue.
I know. I was searching for something. This week, and I don't know. I didn't realize so many Southern Baptists are on my timeline, or people who follow Southern Baptists or whatever. But now that I live in Tennessee, like Southern Baptist is like the thing.
Yeah.
And they voted. And I'm not familiar enough with the whole denominational thing to know the way it works. And I just confess my ignorance outright. But it seems like what I read is that there were two churches disbarred from fellowship, or barred from fellowship, or disfellowshipped, for ordaining women pastors. And then there was a resolution vote taken that pastor and I think elder maybe are no longer, our title's not appropriate to women. Even though if what they're doing is pastoring, that doesn't matter.
Right.
You know,
It's
so
the
that
title's what
in
matters.
essence, that makes sure I think women cannot get a housing allowance and do all the things. And so, I mean, I'm watching this, and I agree for our friends like Susie and Bonnie and Brenda and Johanna and these amazingly gifted women, Bethany, who are incredibly gifted and gifts to the church, but are being told, you know, by not just the Southern Baptist Convention, but by many that, you know, the gifts they have best the gifts they have are best used in the home,
Right.
and under the headship of men. And I understand this, but I grieve it nevertheless. And then our folks at, I don't know, G3, is that at G3 Ministries? I think I don't know if it's related to the Gospel Coalition or not. But anyway, I saw a article floating around that said ordaining female pastors harms the mission, a response to Rick Warren. Rick Warren had this big sort of thing about, hey, I've changed my mind, and, you know, apology and all of that. And this is a response. And one of the arguments Rick Warren was making on the basis of Saddleback is, hey, we've always been unified around a shared mission. There's room to disagree over the particulars that aren't gospel issues. And so this is a response to the claim that this isn't a gospel issue.
Right.
And what I just want to draw attention. You can read it at g3min.org// ordaining pastors harms the
I'll
mission.
put it in the show notes.
Oh, there you go. Anyway, so you can see that I'm not making this up. But one of the things that this individual argues is that male-only headship is not a first-order doctrine. It's not a most important doctrine. It does not fundamentally change the nature of Christianity, which is true. But then what he does is he goes on to argue, but it threatens first-order doctrines. And he starts by talking about how, in a lot of our understandings, we're unified around the gospel. And he counters that, no, the gospel is actually what is the boundary. Like, the gospel is what separates us from everybody else who doesn't believe it. And there are certain core parts of the gospel that are not up for dispute. And he's not arguing that male headship is one of those. But what he's saying is that unity has to have some sort of boundary around it, and we would agree with that. Center set versus bounded set, fuzzy set, all of that stuff that we did, a while back. But the center, here's what he argues: the center of Christian unity is, and he just sort of asserts this without any justification. But he talks about how, okay, the gospel has boundaries. And what are the boundaries? Well, he says the center of Christian unity is the truth of God's word, all of it. So the gospel is the boundary of Christian unity, but the center of Christian unity is the whole counsel of God. So the gospel is the boundary of unity. I can only have fellowship with people who believe the gospel. But what we're united on is the inspired word of God, the whole counsel of God, all the truth contained in its inspired, inerrant, authoritative, and sufficient word. Now you see where this sucker's going. So the center isn't made up anymore of the core proclamation of the message of Jesus. The center is the whole counsel of the word of God, not just some parts, the whole thing, agreed upon as inspired, inerrant, authoritative, and sufficient. So that move enables him to then talk about, then there are gospel-centered things, which male headship is not one of those. But if a disagreement over a doctrine puts our view of the Bible at risk, it threatens the unity of our faith, because the unity of our faith is built around the whole counsel of God. Do you see how that works? Yep. So it's absolutely, so it's just so genius and so cheap. It really is not a great argument. True Christian unity can be achieved only by the truth of God's word within the boundaries of gospel essentials centered on the whole counsel of God. All right, so we've got unity is achieved by the truth of God's word within the boundaries of the gospel essentials and centered on the whole counsel of God.
Yeah.
All right, now the whole counsel of God, and then he says minimization of any of God's truth, of any, inevitably leads to the erosion of doctrine and the ultimate disillusion of true Christian identity. So minimization of any of God's truth leads right to chaos is the idea.
According to their understanding of all these things.
Well, hold on. Yep. Therefore, since at the center of Christian unity is the whole counsel of God, all doctrine matters and affects levels of cooperation to one degree or another. So do you see the move he's made? Warren's argument is, listen, we can be united around the proclamation of the gospel. We don't have to be united in all of the particulars of doctrine.
Right.
Agreed, says this writer. Male eldership isn't a first order issue, but what is the center of Christian unity? It's the whole counsel of God. And because the center of Christian unity is the whole counsel of God, any disagreement about or minimization of what the whole counsel of God teaches can prove the undoing of the unity that we're supposed to keep.
Yeah.
Are you with me?
Yeah.
And then this is his third argument. Even errors in second order doctrines can harm the gospel. And then he gives us the opportunity to quote tweet that, because that's a very, very important point.
You can quote me on that. Please do.
Yeah. So then the question becomes, does error in the second order doctrine of pastoral qualifications threaten the gospel? And his answer, of course, is yes, for 3 reasons. Number 1, female eldership undermines the authority and clarity of Scripture. Number 2, female eldership undermines the created order. And number 3, female eldership submits the church to the spirit of the age. Boom. And I'm sorry. We've done entire podcasts on 2 Timothy or 1 Timothy 2, excuse me. I always want to say 2 Timothy 1 or 1 Timothy 2. It's 1 Timothy 2. And this is just, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, but the level of argumentation here is just, it's very, very poor. Because, okay, so female eldership undermines the authority and clarity of Scripture. A plain, straightforward reading of 1 Timothy 2:12 is abundantly clear. And then here's the verse he quotes. I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. Now, this is so disingenuous. So he doesn't quote the Greek text, out of which almost every single word is disputed.
Right.
Okay? So he just says a plain, straightforward reading is abundantly clear. And this is the most disingenuous argument I read around this whole thing. Because if I were to say, yeah, but what about, Deborah or Huda or Junia? They would give me a whole bunch of reasons why a plain, straightforward reading of the text that allows for women pastors shouldn't be trusted. But here, this is just what it says in English, and there you go.
Yeah.
This is so disingenuous. Because, and then he says this, to take that text and somehow come to the conclusion that women can teach and exercise authority over men requires a level of exegetical, historical, and logistical gymnastics that undermines the clarity and authority of Scripture. So, if it says it in English and it seems to be clear, then we shouldn't dispute it, because then he says, if you can't trust the plain reading of the Bible, of one Bible verse, can we trust any of it?
Great question.
Can we trust the claim that Jesus was born of a virgin? Maybe the word just meant young women. Can we trust the claim that Jesus died in our place and rose victorious? I mean, I'm trying to be very gracious in the spirit of Tim Keller. But here's the idea. So my English Bible says this, therefore it is abundantly clear. And to question this means I have to question all my other English things.
Right.
And obviously the person's smarter than this, but you wouldn't know that unless you knew a bit of the original language to know that every word of this text is disputed, and the arguments against this aren't undermining the Bible. They're using the Bible in defense of their interpretation of the text. Now, what I'm not saying is that, well, guys, anytime we have disagreements over a text, that means we can't know.
Right.
Because that's where some will take this. Well, I mean, everybody disagrees, so we really can't know anything. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that his claim that a plain, straightforward reading of 1 Timothy 2:12, cut out from the rest of the verse and context, in a single English sentence, his claim that it is abundantly clear is patently untrue.
I can do all things.
And it's a cheap, I can do all things through a verse taken out of context. And then to say that the exegetical, historical, and logical gymnastics required to understand this verse. Oh, do you mean like looking at the words that Paul uses in his other letters? Looking at the fact that Paul allows for women to speak as deacons, or as Phoebe, a letter carrier, or as prophets in 1 Corinthians 11? Like noticing those sorts of things, noticing that the verb I do not permit is only used in like restrictive circumstances. It's never as a universal prohibition. That sort of work undermines the clarity of the Bible. I mean, it's nonsense. It is absolutely nonsense. And then, of course, he gets into, well, it undermines the created order. and he quotes the First Timothy part about Adam was formed first, then Eve. Adam was not deceived; the woman was deceived, and we've talked about. And what he draws from this is God intended for men to lead. Now, what's fascinating, that's the conclusion he makes. That's the conclusion he makes.
There you go.
And it's just so funny. The text, there's nothing in the text that suggests that. In fact, that if you want to say, so he says he created Adam first and then created Eve out of Adam. And as we talked about, what God created first was an undifferentiated human being.
Right. The human.
Called the human.
Yeah.
The Adam. Adam isn't a proper name, right? Until later in the text. It's just a name for a human being.
Yeah.
And we have no idea whether this was male or female. Male and female didn't show up until like later in chapter 2, which is a blow up of chapter 1 verses 26 to 28. And it's just and then you can, if you want to, quote tweet this, it's available. When men don't stand and lead, and when they sit by the sideline and shirk their God-given role as leader, defender, pastor, protector, and teacher, attacks against the gospel remain undefended. The church weakens and the serpent wins again.
Yeah, there's some real Driscoll language.
Oh.
It is so fascinating.
Female...
It's kind of like, the nostalgia is a hell of a drug kind of thing. And you do see some of that in some of these things where it's, to me, this is the same thing as like the Make America Great Again. It's like who was in power, who didn't have any autonomy or agency. And
right.
Then, we got to cling to that though, because that's when things were better. And it's not because it was just better for me. It's because everything was better. And you may not like that, but that's just the right order and structure of.
And here's the thing. So he's exactly right, Tim. In his last comment is female eldership, it harms the gospel because it submits the church to the spirit of the age. Mm-hmm. That, we've all, feminism is now like finding its place in our culture. And so, of course, the church is going to go along with that. The issue is all of the teaching that we're pointing to in the Bible happened when feminism wasn't the spirit of the age.
Right.
In fact, it was the antithesis of the spirit of the age.
Right.
And so it's not like we're pointing to, oh no, we have brand new revelation now because feminism is in our, in our culture. It's no, we're looking back at incredibly patriarchal societies and realizing that what Paul and Jesus and others have done is inject the gospel dynamic of siblingship without hierarchy.
Right.
Into situations, whether it was household codes,
right? What you do with the Ephesians thing, right? That still sticks with
exactly.
The inverted social structures of each of the things that Paul lists.
Totally.
And
this is all stuff.
Is it reacting to that, like? Because we have sections, and I can't. So you can correct me because I can't remember where, but there was something with Paul talking about like. Not just like understanding the social structure or the social order of the area that you're going into, and that you have to keep that in mind and respect some of that because their hearts will become so hard and they won't hear. And so you see these subtle things where he does invert in a completely patriarchal society that's also master slave structured, and he inverts all of that in a subtle way of just flipping all those kind of social dynamics around. And like you're saying, that was in a era that was not dominated by equality or equity.
Right.
Or
yes, exactly. Yeah, totally. So to argue that the Bible is fundamentally egalitarian and that just submits to the spirit of the age, could that happen? Sure. Could we read the spirit of the age into the Bible all over the place? Of course. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's what the accusations are around certain versions of sexuality, and
it's also kind of the irony of the article.
Right. Is that what I would argue instead is that this captures the spirit of the fall.
Yep.
And of the age of sin and death and powers and principalities. That's what this captures. It doesn't capture the gospel dynamic. of the liberation of women into full service. Now, all I want to say, and I'm sure, if we were to sit down with the author of the article, we'd have a great conversation. But to just throw this out, or at least I saw it during a week where a huge denomination was voting on restricting roles of women, and then to make the claim that the gospel is under threat. But what is the gospel? Well, the gospel is the boundary of gospel essential, but the center is the whole counsel of God. And so any disagreement about the whole counsel of God, even if it's on a secondary issue, threatens, that's a gospel issue. And then here are 3 reasons that just don't, and again, it's echo chambery, right? Because the people who are reading and digesting some of that just go, well, yeah, I mean, look, that's just what it says in English. And if we can't trust our English translations, then what can we trust?
Which ones?
Oh, so anyway, I don't know. I having a daughter, having a wife.
You just said you are having a daughter. I was like, oh.
Well, I certainly look pregnant. Having had with my wife a daughter, having been with my wife while she had a daughter, and being friends with Susie and Bethany and all of our, I mean, just incredibly gifted women. I just had no idea what it was like to sit and wade through some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And obviously, we're empathetic, and so there's an immediate empathy argument that goes, I hate that you had to go through that.
Mm-hmm. And we're still going through that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not like it's over. I mean, Susie, just texted me that article, the one that we just looked at, was so, discouraged by that. And I have no problem the fact that there's, massive amounts of disagreement, and I don't think anyone's, I think the fruit of salvation shows itself not just in correctness, but in a host of other ways. So disagreements aren't a threatening thing, or shouldn't be. They were all over the early church, as a matter of fact. Yeah. But when you begin to redefine like what counts as being a Christian, and even though he gives lip service to, well, male eldership isn't a first order issue, but then he backs himself into making it a first order issue.
Yeah, he makes it a
by saying, well, but the center of our faith can't be the whole counsel of God. The center of our faith can't be. I want to say it can't be the Bible, but I know the counter to that, because, well, then how else do we know anything about the center of the faith?
Well, I thought it's just not that two-dimensional, I think, is the problem. And that's why the Gombas's national park metaphor has been.
You love the metaphors.
Well, but it's a really good one, because it's we keep ourselves in the gift shop with a two-dimensional understanding of everything, and then build doctrines that build those walls that keep people in and out, and then we're just like, our three-dimensional imagination, or four-dimensional, if you go out and smell it and feel it, and we're cutting up, we're limiting ourselves dramatically, and then building structures that keep people out based on that limited understanding. It's just so sad and gross.
It is. And I'm not, and I don't know, I always feel like I need
you don't.
Well, I know, but I'm going to. Like, I buy all the things. I buy it. I buy the doctrinal statements, and I buy the creeds, and I affirm all of it. It's just, and so, like, the gift shop metaphor, when I'm standing in the gift shop as opposed to going into the national park, and I'm looking at pictures of the gift shop rather than looking at the national park. It's kind of like looking through my phone to experience the world, right?
Right.
I'm so busy capturing it, I don't experience anything. There's a sense in which that same tragic dynamic gets played out in our churches and with our believings. We're so intent on making sure and clarifying, and I'm like, I I think there are parts of that that are super important. I buy like the whole story. I buy it. But there's another sense that it just goes so tragically awry when the believings generated by the Bible become the center of the faith rather than the inspired God sitting behind the Bible.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And then what that inspired God is asking of you through that text.
Totally.
So it's just,
So
I don't know
so
if it's
anyway.
like a laziness because it is asking for so much more of us. And we just don't want, it's easier for it to be an identity than it is for it to be like a fully,
Sure. Fully orbed reality.
yeah.
Absolutely. But we would have the same issue, right? I mean, the temptation I'm always fighting is it's the same temptation of the Pharisee going, well, I'm glad I'm not like
Right.
those other people, and then so I don't
those
know
who
how to
hate because they hate.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a self-righteousness on every side that has to be warred against,
Well, it's hard because with my wife or my therapist or other people saying, like, getting on me to stop doom scrolling. And I was talking to a friend the other day where it's like, I don't think it's doom scrolling. I think it's reality scrolling. Like, I'm not even seeking things out. This is just the reality of the world around us. But instead of picking fights and having arguments, I've just become less and less interested in the conversation. And then I find myself in a weird spot because I start to feel guilty because, like, the conversation, this article, like, I'm just like, well, then I'll start a church where women are on completely equal footing and they'll be in all facets of leadership. And I don't care if your church doesn't do that. Go do what you want to do. And if you don't want to come be a part of ours, then there's 50 other churches that will uphold what you think is important. So I'm like, I'll just do that instead. But then I feel guilty because this article is talking about a reality in which a lot of women, and it's not just women, it'll be, people in lower socioeconomic areas, people of color. There's all still ways in which we ostracize, and I feel guilty to not push back on that system. So that's the tumble dry that I find myself in, is like, I could just step outside of it and just build a new structure, but that is the history of the church. I don't agree with what you're doing. I'm going to step out and build a new version. But at the same time, I only have so much. We always joke about our outrage meters, and mine keeps finding new depths every time I think I've hit my limit. But I don't want to be running around yelling all the time. That's why I've always been so enamored with Shane Claiborne, is that he even with really hard topics, he's never angry in his responses to it. He's direct. Yeah. But he's never angry, and then he's practical with the solutions. So there's people like him that are still pioneering like a really healthy version of all this. But like the thing with the daughters, we've said a million times, like, that's a deal breaker for me. I will not put Mazzy in a church building that tells her that God thinks that she's less than her brother. Period. I'm not going to go fight that fight while she has to hear that garbage. So it's a non-starter.
Oh, Tim, I really resonate with that, man, because I'm the same way. Like, you can live an entire life in the outrage of dumbness that's out there. Like, and I want to give an example of how this played out for me yesterday, because I really don't know the answer. So there's a woman called the Transformed Wife on Twitter. She's at Godly Womanhood. And here's her tweet. She's a wife, a mother, a grandma, and a keeper at home. Loves Jesus and is not afraid to speak truth with a capital T because it sets you free. So she tweets, so a woman's husband wanted sex with her, but he said no. Excuse me. So a woman's husband wanted sex with her, but she said no.
This is going to be interesting.
Yeah. Hello. A woman's husband wanted sex with her, but she said no. Yep. She woke up in the middle of the night and he was having sex with her. She asked me if this was marital rape. It was the first time he had done this, and he was never physically abusive towards her. I told her, no, don't even think like that. Don't destroy a marriage over this. Show grace. We aren't to deprive our husbands sexually, 1 Corinthians 7:5. Only physically abusive husbands rape their wives. If he wakes you up to have sex with you, go for it. Sex doesn't always need to be planned. Be spontaneous sometimes. Now, I don't have words strong enough for that.
Yeah.
That's really, really, really awful advice. I mean, really awful.
Yeah.
Really awful. No, if he's not abusive, he's not raping you. Oh, okay. So I fire off, and this is all coming back. I read this not because I had a great response, but because the response does nothing. Like, so I wrote, absolute hot garbage. Paul teaches mutuality and reciprocity as husband and wife, not entitlement and coercion. If you're ever in this situation, run. And I just go off in my like, oh yeah. Okay, I've done it. I've served Jesus. And I'm just sitting there thinking about it later, going, I mean, what do you do? Because the traps are legion. Because I could sit and just go, here's this grandma who, I mean, and I have better things to do to attack grandmas. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. But that's so bad.
That
but
must be the title
don't
of this
we,
episode.
we know it's all bad, right? I mean, don't we like? Does
Apparently
anyone
not.
care? Well, I don't know. What's our role, Tim?
I don't know.
I don't know either. It's like, okay, so I put out my little. I disagree. What's that do? What does that do? And what sort of dynamics is it feeding in me? I don't know.
That is the hard question. Like even when we were talking with Sheila and what was her daughter's name?
Rebecca.
A couple episodes ago, and you know, I was articulating that, and this was such a dumb point, but like that I had this realization one day that like the garbage that I grew up with, that all of my issues with lust or different things were because of women.
That's right.
And that I was the victim of that scenario. Like that's how it's presented, and you take that as truth. And when I had the realization of like, oh, I have agency in this conversation, like I can choose how I see things, how I react to things, how I invest in things. This is not her fault. This is actually like an action that I can change.
Yeah.
It sounds so dumb, but it was a huge freeing realization where it's like, oh, I'm not a victim. I can change this.
Yeah. I have agency in this.
And so I see that, and when I hear that tweet, I'm like, there is like for me, that was such a huge point of like, it's again, sounds so dumb, but it was revelatory. And I want other people to have those revelations where it's like, you're not women who have grown up in the church. You don't belong to us. Like you're not our objects. You're not our what property. And that's exactly what that language is. Like it's, oh, you are there to serve him. You're there. I'm like shaking. It makes me so angry. Like you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's just such a, so you have to like, we can't just sit by, this is why I continually have this question for you guys over and over again, whenever I'm like, hey, sorry, let's revisit this one more time of what is like, I look at the world and I don't know what my place is. Like, what is a peacemaker in this world with something like that? Because that woman's not experiencing peace. That woman is experiencing abuse, and then being told that that's her role to play is to accept and experience abuse. So what does a peacemaker do in that situation?
Yeah.
How do you rewire the system so that she's not experiencing that?
No, you can't. You can't.
I can't, no. But if I don't and everybody doesn't, then what? That's the conundrum.
I don't know. But what if we all invested all of that energy into building alternative communities where that sort of thing wasn't tolerated? Then, right?
Yep, it's wild.
So I'm just camping off of like, yeah, I mean, it's one thing to like publicly say, hey, there's a different way to look at this. And I just don't know where the line is. I mean, I'm so close to just being done with all social media. I just don't, it serves nothing.
Yeah.
It used to be fun or minimally it was distracting.
Right.
Now it's I don't know.
That's the weird thing too. I think I've talked to my students. I've mentioned this before of like, social media. We were talking about cyberbullying and how parents and schools can't keep up with it because it happens so quickly. Whereas bullies, when
Yeah.
we were kids, someone walked up and hit somebody on campus, you knew who it was. But now
Yeah.
cyberbullying, that kind of stuff is so behind the scenes. And I was like, what are you guys going to do with social media? Because it's not going to go away if you decide that it's negative. So what can
Yeah.
you do to make it constructive? And when I think about this
Yeah.
podcast and the way that we are able to connect with people, it's only because of social media. So it's
Is
like,
that true?
yeah, I mean, that's how we have conversations with anybody that's outside of email, but on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, there's conversations being had and people encouraging one another. And that stuff's really positive. It's like, how do you give fuel to that and not to the destructive nature of everything? It's kind of the same question for all of humanity, usually.
Yeah.
How do we feed the good and not the bad?
I'd love some of our community's thoughts on this, because I really don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. Speaking of things I don't know, we got a little revelation to do today. And we still have one more piece of background before we get to the 7 churches. And we've set the table around just a tiny bit around the imperial cult as it presented itself in Asia Minor. And what I want to do before we get into the specific churches, we're not going to take we're not going to go through like each church individually. We'll group them together because there are some commonalities. I want to make a couple of comments on the message of the 7 churches together. So we'll look at them individually a little bit, but I want to look at, for today, I just want to do a little, like maybe 20 minutes or 25 minutes on looking at them together. What do they say when you group them all together? Because the repeated exhortation is listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. So all of the churches are listening to what God is saying to the other churches. And so these aren't just 7 isolated messages. Like, there's a wholeness to this sucker. And just by way of reminder, Timothy John Stafford.
Yeah.
The letter, Revelation, because these are actual flesh and blood churches in the first century, John intended them to be understood and to shape the perceptions of his audience to their everyday realities. So this was not a text that they would have to decode. This was a text they would use to decode their circumstances. And that is a massive difference. The text itself is not some sort of secret code, but as these tiny little, I mean, we can't even imagine how powerless these little outposts of Jesus followers, were in Asia Minor. We can't even imagine how powerless. This was the way in which the writer John would allow people to reinterpret their powerlessness to no, we actually are victorious. Like, I know it doesn't seem this way, but the Roman Empire won't always be here. But the followers of Jesus located in the church will be. I mean, to say that in the first century in Asia Minor, I mean, there's just, I can't even think of an equivalent example. It's like there's nothing that's been that last longing and that powerful in our world, except maybe America. But we're only, 400 years old or whatever it is. So it'd be like the Branch Davidians, if you remember them from Waco, Texas, looking at America and saying, America will disappear and the Branch Davidian cult will take over the world.
Yeah.
You'd be like, you guys are like
right.
70 people who are nuts,
Good luck.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's just no way to convey. So Revelation was intended, and we're just going to keep making this darn point over and over and over and over. It would have been understood by them. It was for them, to them, and about how it was that they should be understanding their world. Right? So how should Revelation understand the goddess Roma? Well, Revelation is going to present Roma not as some victorious, benevolent spirit, but rather as a prostitute who's drunk on the wine of idolatry. I mean, it's like ridiculously subversive. So the 7 letters are the biggest way in which because there's so much happening in the 7 letters that it gets that pulls from chapter 1 and then it gets pulled through to chapter 22. That these aren't like, to people who argue, oh, these are like 7 church ages, or this was written then, but then the rapture happens and the rest is in the future. That's not how the letters function. The letters function as this sort of prism that takes the image of Jesus we got in 1, kind of refracts it throughout the rest of the letter until we line up in chapters 21 and 22 with all of these bow ties on things that were brought up in the 7 letters. Does that make sense? So these are super important parts of the text. They were in very important cities, and one of the reasons we talked before about the fact that they all hosted signs of the imperial cult, whether there were temples or altars or temple, altars. What's the other one? I don't remember. There was another category in there somewhere. But there were 3 different ways that you could like host the imperial cult. And not only were the 7 cities in Revelation important because of that reason, but they were also important because together with other cities, they functioned as kind of a leadership council for all of Asia Minor. And I don't know how to pronounce this. I think it's koinon. But it was a league. It was like a league of these leading city-states. And as this league went, so the whole province of Asia Minor went. And all of these cities were part of that league. And when you look, I would encourage you, I mean, if you're really into wanting to soak the most out of Revelation, sit down and just read the 7 letters. It's all chapter 2 and chapter 3. And read them in one sitting. And what you'll find is that they all repeat a cycle of reoccurring elements. All right. So one of those elements is the command to an angel of the church. They all begin with to an angel of this church. Secondly, it's the command to write something down. Thirdly, there's some association given to each one of these churches that we've just mentioned in the picture of Jesus in chapter 1. Fourthly, Jesus will say, I know your deeds. I mean, one of the scariest things that Jesus could say to his churches is, I know you. I know everything about you. So 4 times or 7 times, he's like, no, I know. Then he gets into warnings and commandments appropriate to the situation of each church. That's where they all diverge, of course. But then there's a promise of divine reward for those who have overcome, who've lived faithfully. And one of the things this is where we get the promises of things that we only see kind of come to fruition in chapters 21 and 22. And then lastly, every letter is followed by a command to like, he who has ears, let him hear. Listen to what the Spirit is saying to the church. So those 7 elements undergird the 7 letters, all right? And they're true all the time. And for instance, I mean, it's not terribly shocking that each of these churches would be represented in the heavens by an angel. One of the things that is true in the Old Testament that Gambus is going to hit on in a couple of episodes is that there's this weird text in Deuteronomy where the nations each have a god, a small g, attached to them. And like in Daniel, when the archangel Michael is delivering a vision to Daniel, or the interpretation of a vision, and he runs into the spirit that oversees the nation of Persia, and they go to war. It's like, oh, okay. So having divine messengers overseeing like groups of people, that's a common thing in the scriptures. And so for each of these 7 churches to be represented, to have an angelic kind of messenger over them, that's congruent with other things, but it's kind of mind-blowing for us because I don't know that that our church has a specific angel attached to it. That would be really interesting.
Got a lot of angels now.
That would be a lot of angels. And then several of them obviously are attached to Seth Erie as guardian angels, who get paid lots of overtime. Now, one of the things you'll notice if you read the 7 letters is that the big vision we got of Jesus, the hair of like wool and the blazing fires and all of the things, like a lot of those, it's called a Christophany, where it's an appearance of Jesus. A lot of those elements get pulled into the 7 churches. So like we read about golden lampstands in chapter 1, and then we read about them in the city of Ephesus. We hear about eyes like flaming fire or feet like burnished bronze, and all of a sudden that shows up in Thyatira. We read about the 7 stars that shows up in the letters to Ephesus and Sardis. A sharp double-edged sword we read in chapter 1 that shows up in the letter to Pergamum. We read about Jesus being the first and the last, died and now alive. In chapter 1, that shows up in the letter to Smyrna. And then we read about the possession of the keys of life and Hades and death. That shows up in the letter to Philadelphia. And so what often we do is we look at chapter 1 as kind of its own thing, and then chapters 2 and 3 as its own thing, and then we get to and I want us to know there's this unity that's being showed off here, where the Jesus that is revealed to John is the same Jesus revealed to the 7 churches. And you know this by noting, hey, the Jesus who holds the 7 stars in his hands is writing to this church, but we just met that Jesus as he holds all the churches in his hands. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then there are all sorts of common themes that get pulled forward, like when Jesus will say, I come quickly, that comes later. When he talks about he who overcomes, that comes later. The tree of life, the book of life, the second death, the morning star, the city of God, the New Jerusalem, all those things are mentioned in the 7 letters, but we get to see their arrival in 21 and 22. So too with things like a new name, being judged according to works, idolatry, sexual immorality, the temple of God, the throne of God. All of these things we're introduced to in the letters that get pulled through the rest of the book. So it's not like God organizes this so that you write the letters to the churches and then dust your hands off and say, okay,
I did it.
Now we're done with today. Let's talk about what the Americans are going to be reading, 2,000 years later. You know what I mean? This is like an organic unity that would have made sense to them. Now, are you with me so far? Is this making sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that's interesting are the various social locations of the 7 churches. Now, there were more churches than 7, right? We know of several other churches in Asia Minor that are referenced in the New Testament besides these 7. And 7, of course, is this hugely symbolic number. So, in a sense, these 7 represent the church in the whole of Asia Minor. Yeah. And to some degree, in the church in every age. Because if you take the 7, the messages to the 7 churches as one message, it's all about a warning against assimilation and a encouragement to be faithful in your discipleship and witness. Like that's the point of the letters. Yeah. and there are churches that are on different ends of the faithfulness, assimilation spectrum. Like on one end, we find there are Christians who are being threatened by hostility from others in the first century. And it's just going to get worse. This is the very beginning of it. And then in the middle of that spectrum, we find congregations that are in internal conflicts about how we should best accommodate pagan practices. So we're going to read about Nicolaitans and Balaam and Jezebel and all of these Old Testament archetypes that are pulled forward that are calling God's people to compromise, to assimilate. So there's a lot of debate in the churches about how best to do that, or whether or not we're to do that at all. And on the other end of the community, so on one end you've got outright persecution. On the other end, you have all sorts of like internal strife in different churches around how much we should compromise with the pagan practices around us. And then on the far end of the spectrum, you just have churches that don't experience any persecution at all because there's nothing distinctive about them. And when you know it, those are the same kind of churches today, right? What? And so the letters represent these three different. If you have a continuum around, they're faithful but persecuted, to they're compromising so they're not persecuted, with some sort of mix in the middle. These letters become really, really interesting insights into what does it look like for the church to be faithful. Because you have obviously the might, the prosperity, the luxury, the gratuity of the Roman Empire, all of that beckoning right outside your door. It wasn't far away. I mean, like partnership with Rome made the provinces richer. Now, it did make everyone in the provinces richer, but certainly the more you participated in acknowledging, the imperial cult, the better off your chances were. Because so much of how it was understood in those days is that if you honored the gods would honor your city. And so if Christians are refusing to honor the gods and instead saying that honor only goes to one God, that's Jesus, that is putting you so at odds. It'd be like whatever your political leaning. Let's say everyone else in your neighborhood, so let's say you're a Democrat, and you live in a place where everyone else in your neighborhood flies a Trump 2020, 2024 flag, or vice versa. You're the conservative and everyone else flies up. I mean, there's something already. You're not right. You're already experiencing like the faintest like whiff of exclusion or not belonging or whatever. Now multiply that a whole bunch and you get why it is that Christians were called atheists and labeled as troublemakers later down the road. But this was just starting in some of the communities. In others of the communities, right, there was just a great deal of, we can be Jesus followers and perfectly fit into the Roman Empire without any hesitation or change or challenge whatsoever. And Jesus is really clear about how that's not an option either.
Well, it's interesting. Like you talk about Rome beckoning outside the door and what that represents, right? It's comfort, it's power, it's money, it's all that kind of stuff. So yes, very similar themes today where, as Gomes would put it, how capitalism has like corrupted or taken over the imaginations of many people in the church. And then it makes me think about Stephen being martyred and him asking, like Jesus asking, what kind of economy are you going to build for me? And not just in like a fiscal economy, but like a economy of social structure. I mean, it just seems real intentional right off the bat too, that there's Jesus was just so clear about these kind of things. I feel like Jesus was vague about a lot of things, would use parables for a lot of things to try to, for whatever purpose. I know people have different understandings of why parables were used, but there are some things that Jesus was like super direct on. Oh yeah. And so it's like, he obviously invited a lot of mystery and our imaginations into some conversations. And then others was just like, listen to what I have to say right now about this one specific thing. Pay attention to this. I'm being super clear. And then we're like, well, maybe he meant.
Totally. And there are a couple of times when, he will say to like, you have some in your church who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice fornication. And then he repeats this. To a different church, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel who calls herself a prophet and is teaching and beguiling my servants to practice fornication and eat food sacrificed to idols. So that issue, fornication and food sacrificed to idols, was the place of compromise. And a lot of people see the two attached as forms of temple worship. Yeah. Right? There was a great deal of temple prostitution in Asia Minor, where you would worship the god, particularly a fertility god or goddess, by engaging in sexual practice. But the eating food sacrificed to idols, that is where this thing really, because you would sacrifice to these, and even in Corinth, Paul is dealing with this issue at length. But you would make sacrifices to these gods, and then the leftover meat would be sold in the marketplace. And so was it permissible? And here, Jesus pulls forward two like archetypes, Balaam and Jezebel, from the Old Testament, to say the way Jezebel and Balaam invited Israel to stumble is the same way these false teachers, are inviting the church to stumble. And he's super clear, super direct about what that would have looked like, and meant. And in other cases, Jesus is talking about how, like, the local synagogues are now persecuting Christians, because we've said this before, but as long as Christianity was thought to be just a subset of Judaism, they were protected by Roman law. But all of a sudden the Jews were like, nope, they're not us. and that really, so there was persecution coming that direction. One of the letters says, I know your affliction, I know the slander on the part of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Hello. And then to another church, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but are lying. I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I loved you. And so you just have like so many social dynamics happening in the midst of these churches. And so I guess what I'm trying to get through to us is, if you read the 7 letters as one letter, with 3 kinds of people making up the church: those who are faithful, those who are tempted, and then those who are compromising. You get a really interesting picture of the American church and what Jesus is saying and promising and encouraging and those sorts of things. One of his most brutal lines is, I know your works. You have a name or reputation for being alive, but you are dead. I have not found your works complete in the sight of my God. You still have, though, a few persons who have not soiled their clothes. Like, the idea is they've polluted themselves by participating in the empire. And so the 2 major issues were the temptation to accommodate. Why? Because it was beginning to cost something to follow this Jesus. And man, if that couldn't be more relevant, to where we're sitting at today.
And that, obviously is mildly tied to the conversation about social media, and not specifically social media, but commenting on, or what is our role in the church at large when it's awry, and the things that I was lamenting. Because I was thinking about, someone was questioning that the other day, like, why are you so harsh on the evangelical church? And I was like, I think it's because I care. Like, if it's my child and my child is acting out of character or doing things that either harm themselves or harm their neighbors, I love my child and I want them to be the best version of themselves that they can be, and the most edifying and restorative to their neighbor. And so I'm going to have hard conversations with them about about why what they're doing is harmful to themselves and harmful to those around them. And it's because I love them. And I think that a lot of this is rooted in that, where I think, or at least the struggle that I have continually is rooted in that. Like, I know I may have a Messiah complex, but I know deep down I'm not a Messiah, and I can't change the course of the church, but I also can't sit on the sidelines idle all the time either.
Yeah,
because I care. I don't want it. I don't want the bride to be represented this way. Like, we were meant for more than this, all of us. And I'd like to see us working towards that, not away from it.
Yeah. Yep. I just don't know how to engage in media without succumbing to the same dynamics that we accuse them of.
Absolutely.
And so, because instantly using the word them, I've just engaged in one of the dynamics, right?
Yep.
But you're right. There has to be a place. And, what makes me think we're qualified to be, I don't know. I literally just go back and forth. That's, social media's been hard for me in that way, because every time I post, I feel like a phony. I feel performing. I feel like, what's this doing? And I get the argument, well, yeah, good philosophy must exist because bad philosophy does. Same with theology or whatever. But I don't know. I'm not sure where it all
Well,
fits.
I think the fact that you struggle with that is at least a good place to begin from.
Maybe.
But you're not going out there just because you want to shoot guns, because you like.
We don't want to shoot grandmas.
Exactly.
Why would we shoot grandmas?
But there is something to, it's the same conversation with the, I just am continually baffled every day by the minority. And we've talked about this, like the Marjorie Taylor Greens in that camp that they're such a minority in this country, but they are causing so much damage, and they're rallying people because they're the loudest ones in the room. And we're watching that in different scenarios around this new kind of sense of entitlement. We've talked about it with with parents at sporting events and that kind of stuff, this entitlement. And if people don't find a constructive way of pushing back on that, then that will become the standard. And it's like, so I don't know what that looks like, but at the same time, I don't think that those people should be allowed to just run around and set fires everywhere they want.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, anyway, man, that's good, Timothy.
Send us emails. Tell us how we do it.
or like, I mean, Shane does it great. There's an integrity to
There is
him
an integrity that I really respect.
I love and respect. Yeah. So I don't know, man. So many other thoughts. We'll cap it here. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just experienced the Voxology podcast with all of its nonsense and tomfoolery. If you're willing, would you like, rate, review, subscribe? What else? Like, rate, review, subscribe,
I don't know. Just
share.
think about, how churches have their bylines or like their mission statements or
Yeah.
whatever. Ours
Yes.
would be great if it was like theology and tomfoolery or something like that. What is Voxology about? Yeah, it's one
The
part
theology of
2 parts
tomfoolery.
tomfoolery.
Yeah, that's fair. we need a Tom probably.
Tim.
Yeah, it's close as we're gonna get.
Tomfoolery.
Anyway, brothers and sisters, thank you for allowing us the great privilege of being a part of your life. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next episode. Bye.
To the next episode.